The dust swirled around Jake Morrison's weathered boots as he guided his horse through the narrow canyon pass. 23 years of ranching had carved lines into his face like the desert wind carved the red rocks around him. His ranch, the Double M, stretched across 3,000 acres of Arizona territory. But today, he rode alone through Apache lands, searching for stray cattle that had wandered too far from home. The sun beat down mercilessly as Jake adjusted his hat and squinted at the horizon. Something caught his eye near a cluster of mesquite trees. At first, he thought it might be one of his missing steers. But as he rode closer, his heart nearly stopped. A small figure lay crumpled on the ground, barely moving. Jake dismounted quickly and approached with caution. It was a young Apache girl, no more than 8 years old. Her dark hair matted with blood from a wound on her forehead. Her traditional dress was torn and dirty, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. Around her, the tracks in the sand told a violent story. Horse hooves, boot prints, and signs of struggle painted a picture Jake had seen too many times before. "Easy there, little one," Jake whispered softly as he knelt beside her. The girl's eyes fluttered open, revealing pools of deep brown that held more fear and pain than any child should know. She tried to speak, but only a weak whisper escaped her lips in her native tongue. Jake didn't speak Apache, but he understood the universal language of suffering. Without hesitation, he scooped the girl into his arms and carried her to his horse. She weighed almost nothing, her small frame trembling against his chest as he mounted and settled her in front of him on the saddle. The ride back to his ranch seemed to take forever. Jake's mind raced with questions and concerns. Who was this child? Where was her family? What had happened to leave her alone and injured in the middle of nowhere? He had heard stories of Apache children being separated from their tribes during raids or attacks, but seeing it firsthand filled him with a rage he struggled to contain. As they approached the Double M, Jake's housekeeper, Maria Gonzalez, rushed out to meet them. The middle-aged Mexican woman had worked for Jake since his wife died 5 years earlier, and she had a motherly instinct that extended to all living creatures on the ranch. "Dios mío, what happened?" Maria exclaimed, as Jake carefully handed the unconscious girl down to her. "Found her hurt in Devil's Canyon," Jake replied grimly. "Looks like she's been through hell." Maria carried the girl inside while Jake unsaddled his horse. The ranch house was simple but comfortable, with thick adobe walls that kept the desert heat at bay. Maria had already prepared the guest bedroom and was gently cleaning the child's wounds when Jake entered. "She needs a doctor," Maria said, her voice filled with concern as she dabbed at the head wound with a wet cloth. "Doc Peterson is in Tucson for the week," Jake replied, running his hand through his graying hair. "We'll have to do what we can ourselves." For the next 3 days, Jake and Maria took turns caring for the injured girl. They cleaned her wounds, fed her small spoonfuls of broth when she was conscious enough to swallow, and kept cool cloths on her fevered brow. Jake found himself checking on her throughout the night, something stirring in his heart that he hadn't felt since his own daughter had died of fever years before. On the 4th morning, the girl finally opened her eyes fully and stayed awake. She looked around the unfamiliar room with confusion and fear, her small hands gripping the blankets tightly. When Jake entered carrying a bowl of warm milk, she pressed herself against the headboard, watching him warily. "It's all right," Jake said softly, setting the bowl on the bedside table. "You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." The girl studied his face intently, as if trying to read his intentions. Slowly, she reached for the milk and drank it carefully, never taking her eyes off him. When she finished, she spoke in halting English. "You save me," she whispered. Jake nodded, surprised that she could speak his language. "What's your name, little one?" "Ayana," she replied. "It means eternal blossom." "That's a beautiful name," Jake said gently. "I'm Jake. This is my ranch. Can you tell me what happened to you?" Ayana's eyes filled with tears as memories flooded back. In broken English, mixed with Apache words that Jake couldn't understand, she told him about the attack on her family's camp. Bad men with guns had come in the night. Her parents had hidden her under a fallen log, but when she came out, everyone was gone. She had wandered for days, following the river, until exhaustion and her injuries finally overcame her. Jake felt his jaw clench with anger. He had heard rumors of outlaw gangs targeting Apache settlements, stealing horses and supplies, sometimes taking captives to sell across the border. The thought that this innocent child had suffered because of such evil made his blood boil. "Where is your family now?" Jake asked gently. Ayanna shook her head sadly. "I don't know. Maybe they think I am dead too." That evening, Jake sat on his front porch, wrestling with what to do next. He could try to find Ayanna's tribe, but that might take weeks or even months. He could take her to the army fort, but he had little trust in how the military treated Apache people. As he watched the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, Jake sat down with Ayanna, who was now strong enough to sit up in bed and eat solid food. "Ayanna," he said carefully, "I want you to know that you can stay here as long as you need to. Maria and I will take care of you. If we can find your family, we'll help you get back to them. But if we can't," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "If we can't, then this can be your home for as long as you want it to be." Ayanna's eyes widened with surprise, and something that might have been hope. "You would do this? For Apache girl?" "I would do this for you," Jake replied firmly. "Because every child deserves a safe place to grow up." Over the following weeks, Ayanna slowly regained her strength. Maria taught her to cook traditional Mexican dishes, while also preparing Apache foods that reminded the girl of home. Jake showed her around the ranch, teaching her about the cattle and horses, and she displayed a natural gift with animals that amazed him. Despite his efforts to locate Ayanna's tribe, Jake's searches proved fruitless. The Apache bands were constantly moving, and the recent attacks had scattered many families across hundreds of miles of desert. As months passed, it became clear that Ayanna might never find her birth family, but in an unexpected way, she had found a new family. Jake discovered that having a child in his house again brought him a joy he had thought lost forever. Ayanna's laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent too long, and her presence seemed to breathe new life into the old ranch. Jake hired a retired school teacher from town to give Ayanna proper lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic, while also encouraging her to maintain her Apache language and traditions. He wanted her to be prepared for whatever future she chose, whether that meant staying in the white world or returning to her people someday. As Ayanna grew from a frightened child into a confident young girl, she became an integral part of life at the Double M. She helped Maria with household tasks, assisted Jake with ranch work, and even learned to ride horses with a skill that impressed the cowboys who worked the spread. The years passed peacefully. Ayanna grew tall and strong, her Apache heritage evident in her graceful movements and deep connection to the land. She spoke both English and Apache fluently, and Jake made sure she understood her own culture, as well as the customs of the world she now lived in. When Ayanna turned 16, Jake sat her down for a serious conversation. "You're becoming a woman now," he said, his voice filled with fatherly pride. "Soon you'll have to decide what kind of life you want to build for yourself." Ayanna looked at him with the same intense gaze she had given him that first day in the sick room. "This is my life," she said simply. "You and Maria, this ranch, this is my family now. But I also want to know more about my people, my real heritage." Jake nodded, understanding. "Then we'll make sure you have that chance." That summer, Jake arranged for Ayanna to spend time with friendly Apache families who lived peacefully near the town of Prescott. She learned traditional crafts, participated in ceremonies, and absorbed the stories and wisdom of her people. But each evening, she returned to the Double M, having found a way to honor both parts of her identity. As Ayanna approached her 18th birthday, Jake began to notice changes in how others looked at her. She had grown into a beautiful young woman, with long black hair that gleamed in the sunlight, and dark eyes that held both Apache wisdom and the confidence Jake had helped nurture. The young men in town had certainly noticed, and Jake found himself feeling protective in ways that surprised him. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Ayanna surprised him with a question. "Do you think I'll ever find someone who could love both sides of me?" she asked quietly. "The Apache side and the part that belongs here?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking about his answer. The right person will love all of you, he said finally. And until you find that person, you always have a home here. Ayanna smiled and squeezed his hand. You saved more than my life that day in the canyon, she said. You saved my heart too. But even as they shared this peaceful moment, neither of them knew that changes were coming that would test everything they had built together. The world outside their ranch was becoming more complicated, and soon Ayanna would face choices that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her future. 2 years had passed since that conversation on the porch, and Ayanna Morrison had grown into a remarkable young woman of 20. Jake had legally adopted her when she turned 18, giving her his last name and making their bond official in the eyes of the law. The Double M Ranch had prospered under their combined efforts, with Ayanna's natural understanding of the land and animals proving invaluable to their success. But change was coming to Arizona territory, and with it, challenges that would test everything Jake and Ayanna had built together. The trouble started when the Copper Crown Mining Company arrived in the valley, bringing with them plans to extract ore from the mountains that bordered Apache sacred lands. The company's representative, a smooth-talking businessman named Harrison Blackwood, had been making offers to local ranchers, trying to buy up land for mining operations. When Blackwood arrived at the Double M, Jake listened politely to his proposal, but firmly declined to sell. This land's been my life for over 20 years, Jake told him. It's not for sale. Blackwood's eyes had lingered on Ayanna, who was working with a young colt in the corral nearby. That's quite an unusual situation you have here, he commented with a cold smile. An Apache woman living as your daughter? Jake's jaw tightened. Ayanna is my daughter, in every way that matters. Of course, Blackwood replied. But his tone suggested he thought otherwise. Just seems like it might cause complications down the road. After Blackwood left, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the man's visit had been about more than just buying land. There was something calculating in the way he had looked at Ayanna. Something that made Jake's protective instincts flare. His concerns proved justified when trouble began escalating in the territory. Mining operations disrupted traditional Apache hunting grounds, and tensions between the company's workers and local Apache bands grew increasingly volatile. When several Apache warriors were arrested for allegedly stealing mining equipment, the situation reached a boiling point. Ayanna found herself caught between two worlds in ways she had never experienced before. The Apache community looked to her as someone who could bridge the gap between their people and the white settlers, while many in the white community viewed her with suspicion because of her heritage. The crisis came to a head one hot August morning when a group of Apache warriors, led by a fierce young chief named Dakota, arrived at the Double M. Ayanna recognized some of them from her visits to the Apache settlements. But Dakota was new to her. He was perhaps 25 years old, tall and powerfully built, with intense dark eyes and traditional warrior markings that spoke of his status among his people. We come to speak with the Apache woman who lives with the white rancher, Dakota announced in accented English, his eyes fixed on Ayanna. Jake stepped forward protectively, but Ayanna placed a gentle hand on his arm. It's all right, she said quietly. I'll speak with them. As the group dismounted, Dakota approached Ayanna with a mixture of respect and curiosity in his expression. When he spoke to her in Apache, his voice was deep and commanding, but she could hear genuine concern beneath his stern exterior. You have forgotten your people, he said in their native tongue. While we fight to protect our sacred lands, you live in comfort with the white man. Ayanna felt a flash of anger, but she kept her voice calm and respectful. I have not forgotten my people. But this man saved my life. When I was a child, he is my father now, and his fight is my fight. Dakota studied her for a long moment, and Ayanna found herself wondering what he was thinking. There was something magnetic about his presence, a strength and determination that reminded her of the stories her adoptive Apache families had told her about the great warriors of the past. The mining company is destroying our sacred places, Dakota continued. They dig up the bones of our ancestors and poison the water our children drink. We need someone who can speak to the white leaders, someone they will listen to. What are you asking of me? Ayanna replied. Come with us. Use your position to help negotiate a fair agreement. Your father has influence with the ranchers and townspeople. Together, we could find a peaceful solution. Jake, who had been listening to their conversation without understanding the words, stepped closer. What's he saying? He asked Ayanna. Ayanna translated the conversation, and Jake's expression grew troubled. It's a dangerous situation, he said. Tensions are running high on both sides. If you get involved, you could end up caught in the middle when things turn violent. But if I don't get involved, innocent people might die, Ayanna replied. Both Apache and white settlers. Maybe I can help prevent that. Jake looked at his adopted daughter, seeing in her face the same determination that had helped her survive as a lost child in the desert. He knew that trying to stop her would be like trying to hold back the wind. If you're going to do this, we do it smart, Jake said finally. No taking sides. No making promises you can't keep. And you come home every night. Over the next few weeks, Ayanna found herself serving as an unofficial mediator between the Apache bands and the mining company. She attended meetings with town officials, translated during negotiations, and worked tirelessly to find common ground between the two sides. During this time, she found herself working closely with Dakota, whose initial suspicion of her gradually gave way to respect and something deeper. Despite his stern exterior, she discovered that he was intelligent, thoughtful, and genuinely committed to protecting his people while avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. One evening, as they rode back from a particularly difficult meeting with mining officials, Dakota surprised her by speaking in English. You have a good heart, he said quietly. And you are braver than many warriors I know. Ayanna felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. I'm just trying to do what's right. That is what makes you brave, Dakota replied. It would be easier to choose one side or the other. Walking between two worlds takes courage. As they paused by a stream to rest their horses, Dakota turned to look at her directly. I was wrong about you, he admitted. I thought living with the white rancher had made you forget who you are. But I see now that you have found a way to be both Apache and something new, something that belongs to both worlds. Their eyes met, and Ayanna felt something shift between them, a connection that went beyond their shared heritage and common cause. She found herself noticing things about Dakota that had nothing to do with politics or negotiations. The way he moved with unconscious grace, the gentleness in his hands when he dealt with his horse, the sadness that sometimes flickered in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. But their growing closeness was complicated by the increasingly volatile situation around them. The mining company, frustrated by the negotiations, began pressuring local officials to use force against the Apache bands. Harrison Blackwood made it clear that he viewed Ayanna's mediation efforts as an obstacle to his plans. Miss Morrison, he said during one tense meeting, surely you understand that business must proceed. These Apache concerns are quaint, but hardly practical in the modern world. These concerns are about survival, Ayanna replied firmly. The Apache aren't asking for charity. They're asking for their sacred sites to be respected and for clean water for their children. Blackwood's smile was cold. Perhaps your unique background makes it difficult for you to see this situation objectively. The veiled insult hung in the air, but before Ayanna could respond, Jake spoke up from where he had been listening quietly in the back of the room. My daughter sees this situation more clearly than anyone else here, he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had built respect through decades of fair dealing. Maybe instead of questioning her judgment, we should listen to what she's trying to tell us. The confrontation marked a turning point. Blackwood and his allies began working actively to undermine the negotiations, spreading rumors that Ayanna was secretly working with Apache raiders and that Jake was harboring enemies of the territory. The pressure intensified when a group of miners claimed they had been attacked by Apache warriors near one of the sacred sites. Though Dakota insisted his people had nothing to do with the incident, the accusation gave Blackwood the excuse he needed to demand military intervention. As tensions reached a breaking point, Ayanna found herself facing an impossible choice. The Apache bands were preparing to defend their lands by force if necessary, while the territorial government was mobilizing troops to protect the mining operations. One night, as she sat on the porch of the ranch house wrestling with the situation, Dakota appeared out of the darkness like a ghost. She wasn't surprised to see him. Somehow, she had known he would come. "My people are leaving tomorrow," he said quietly, moving deeper into the mountains where the soldiers will have difficulty following. "That's probably wise," Ayana replied, though her heart sank at the thought. "I want you to come with us," Dakota said suddenly. "Not just for the negotiations, but to stay. To be part of our band." Ayana looked at him in surprise. "You're asking me to leave everything I've known?" "I'm asking you to choose where your heart truly belongs," Dakota replied. "You have been a bridge between our worlds, but now the bridge is burning. Soon you will have to stand on one side or the other." Before Ayana could respond, Jake appeared in the doorway. He had obviously heard the conversation, and his face was carefully neutral. "Ayana," he said quietly, "the choice is yours to make. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt to think of you leaving, but I've always known this day might come." The three of them stood there in the moonlight, each understanding that whatever decision was made would change their lives forever. Ayana looked from Jake, the man who had saved her life and raised her as his own daughter, to Dakota, who represented a connection to her heritage and possibly her future. "I need time to think," she said finally. Dakota nodded gravely. "We leave at dawn. If you decide to come, meet us at Eagle Rock." After he disappeared back into the darkness, Jake and Ayana sat together on the porch steps, neither speaking for a long time. "He's a good man," Jake said finally. "Are you trying to talk me into leaving?" Ayana asked with a sad smile. "I'm trying to be the kind of father who wants what's best for his daughter, even if it breaks his heart," Jake replied. Ayana leaned against his shoulder, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of her. "What would you do?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "I'd follow my heart," he said. "But I'd also remember that running away from problems doesn't solve them. Sometimes, the hardest choice is to stay and fight for what you believe in." As dawn approached, Ayana made her decision, one that would set in motion events that would test every relationship she had built and every belief she held dear. As the first rays of sunlight painted the desert sky in shades of gold and pink, Ayana made her way to Eagle Rock. Her heart pounded with each step, knowing that her decision would disappoint someone she loved, no matter what choice she made. When she reached the meeting place, she found Dakota waiting alone, his horse packed for the long journey into the mountains. "I was not sure you would come," he said, his dark eyes searching her face. "I almost didn't," Ayana admitted. "But I realized that running away wouldn't solve anything. If I go with you now, I'm abandoning the people here who need someone to speak for them, and I'm abandoning Jake, who deserves better than that." Dakota's expression showed disappointment, but also understanding. "You have chosen your path. I've chosen to stay and fight for a solution that works for everyone," Ayana corrected. "But that doesn't mean I'm choosing against you or your people." Before Dakota could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. A group of territorial soldiers, led by Captain William Hayes, emerged from behind the rock formations surrounding them. Ayana's blood ran cold as she realized they had been watching the meeting. Well, Captain Hayes said with a cold smile. "Miss Morrison and the Apache chief having a secret meeting. This is quite convenient." "There's nothing secret about it," Ayana said firmly, stepping forward. "We were discussing peaceful negotiations." "Were you indeed?" Hayes replied mockingly. "It looks more like conspiracy to me. Apache raids have been increasing, and here we find you meeting with one of their leaders." Dakota's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but Ayana quickly stepped between him and the soldiers. "Captain Hayes, you know me. You know I've been working to prevent violence, not encourage it. What I know," Hayes said, "is that you've been playing both sides, and now we have evidence of your collaboration with the enemy." The situation escalated quickly. Hayes ordered his men to arrest both Ayana and Dakota, claiming they were conspirators in the recent Apache raids. As the soldiers moved forward, Dakota drew his knife, preparing to fight his way out. "Don't," Ayana said urgently. "If you fight them, you'll only prove their point." "I will not be taken prisoner," Dakota replied, his voice hard with determination. "Then go," Ayanna said quickly. "Right away now. While you still can. I will not leave you to face this alone." "You have to," Ayanna insisted. "Your people need you more than I do." For a moment, Dakota hesitated, his eyes locked with hers. Then, with a sound of frustration, he vaulted onto his horse and rode hard toward the mountains, leaving Ayanna to face the soldiers alone. Captain Hayes ordered her arrest, and despite her protests, Ayanna found herself locked in the territorial jail, charged with aiding and abetting Apache raiders. The news spread quickly through the territory, dividing the community between those who believed in her innocence and those who saw her arrest as proof that no Apache could be trusted. Jake arrived at the jail within hours, his face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous, Hayes," he confronted the captain. "The evidence suggests otherwise," Hayes replied coldly. "Secret meetings, passing information to Apache raiders. It all points to treason." "What evidence?" Jake demanded. "You saw her talking to one man. That's hardly evidence of conspiracy." But Hayes had already made up his mind, influenced by pressure from Harrison Blackwood and other mining interests who saw Ayanna's arrest as a way to end the troublesome negotiations. As Ayanna sat in her cell, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. She had tried to build bridges between two worlds. But now it seemed that both sides viewed her with suspicion. The white community saw her as an Apache spy, while some among the Apache might view her arrest as proof that she had been foolish to trust the white man's justice. Her resolve was strengthened when Maria arrived with food and news from the outside. "The Apache bands are planning something," Maria whispered urgently. "Word is that Dakota is gathering warriors to attack the jail and free you." "He can't do that," Ayanna said quickly. "If he attacks the jail, it will start a war that will destroy everything we've worked for. How can you stop him from here?" Ayanna thought for a moment, then made a request that surprised Maria. "I need you to get a message to Jake. Tell him I need him to ride to the Apache camps and deliver a message from me to Dakota." The plan that formed in Ayanna's mind was risky, but it was the only way she could see to prevent the violence that seemed inevitable. She would use her imprisonment as an opportunity to expose the real conspiracy, the one led by Blackwood and his allies to drive the Apache off their lands by force. When Jake arrived that evening, she quickly explained her plan. "I need you to find Dakota and tell him not to attack the jail. Instead, I need him to help me gather evidence of what Blackwood has really been doing." "What kind of evidence?" Jake asked. "The miners who claimed they were attacked by Apache. I think they were lying. If we can prove that Blackwood staged those attacks to justify military action, we can expose the real conspiracy." Jake was skeptical. "That's a dangerous accusation to make without proof. Then we need to find proof," Ayanna replied firmly. "And we need Dakota's help to do it." The next day, Jake rode out to find the Apache camp, carrying Ayanna's message. It took him 2 days of hard riding through treacherous mountain terrain, but he finally located Dakota and his warriors preparing for an assault on the jail. When Jake delivered Ayanna's message, Dakota listened intently, his expression growing thoughtful. "She asks much," he said finally. "To trust the white man's justice system when it has already betrayed her." "She's not asking you to trust the system," Jake replied. "She's asking you to help her prove the truth." After a long discussion with his warriors, Dakota agreed to the plan. Instead of attacking the jail, he would help gather evidence against Blackwood. The Apache had been watching the mining operations closely and had observed several suspicious activities that might support Ayanna's theory. Working together, Jake and Dakota uncovered evidence that the recent Apache attacks had actually been staged by Blackwood's men to create justification for military intervention. They found mining equipment that had supposedly been stolen by Apache raiders hidden in Blackwood's own camps. They also discovered correspondence between Blackwood and certain corrupt territorial officials discussing plans to eliminate the Apache problem once and for all. But gathering evidence was only half the battle. They still needed to get it to someone in authority who would act on it. That's when an unexpected ally emerged, Judge Samuel Crawford, a fair-minded man who had been suspicious of the speed with which Ayanna had been arrested and charged. When Jake and Dakota presented their evidence to Judge Crawford, he was initially skeptical, but as he examined the documents and interviewed witnesses, including some of Blackwood's own men who had grown uncomfortable with their employer's methods, the truth began to emerge. The revelation that the Apache raids had been fabricated sent shockwaves through the territory. Ayanna was immediately released from jail, and arrest warrants were issued for Blackwood and his conspirators. Captain Hayes, who had been acting on orders from corrupt territorial officials, found himself facing an investigation into his own conduct. But the victory came with a price. The exposure of the conspiracy had prevented an immediate war. But tensions in the territory remained high. The mining company, though discredited, still had powerful backers who were not ready to give up their plans for the Apache lands. As Ayanna walked out of the jail, she found both Jake and Dakota waiting for her. The two men had developed a grudging respect for each other during their collaboration. But she could see the question in both their eyes. What would happen now? "Thank you," she said to both of them. "I couldn't have done this without either of you." Jake smiled and embraced her. "Welcome home, daughter." Dakota approached more hesitantly. "You were right to stay and fight," he admitted. "But the fight is not over. My people still need someone to speak for them. And they'll have that," Ayanna assured him. "But not just someone who speaks for the Apache to the white world. Someone who can speak for all the people of this territory to each other." Over the following months, Ayanna worked with both communities to establish a lasting peace. The corrupt officials were removed from office, and new agreements were negotiated that protected Apache sacred sites while allowing legitimate development in other areas. It wasn't perfect, and it required constant vigilance to maintain, but it was progress. As for her personal life, Ayanna found herself at another crossroads. Dakota had remained in the area, and their collaboration had deepened the connection between them. But she also knew that her work bridging the two communities meant she couldn't fully belong to either world in the traditional sense. One evening, as she sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset, Dakota arrived for what she somehow knew would be an important conversation. "I have been thinking," he said, settling beside her on the steps, "about what it means to belong to two worlds." And what have you concluded?" Ayanna asked. "That perhaps it is time for someone to create a new world," Dakota replied, "one that honors the best of both." He turned to look at her directly. "I am asking if you would consider creating that world with me, not as Apache, not as white, but as something new." Ayanna felt her heart skip a beat. "Are you proposing to me, Dakota?" "I am proposing that we build a life together that bridges our two peoples," he said seriously. "But yes, I am also asking you to be my wife." Before Ayanna could answer, Jake appeared in the doorway. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said with a smile. "And I think it's time for me to give my blessing to whatever makes my daughter happy." Ayanna looked from Jake to Dakota, seeing in both their faces the love and respect that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the frightened child Jake had rescued years ago, and how that little girl could never have imagined the woman she would become. "Yes," she said finally, her voice strong and certain. "I'll marry you, Dakota. And together we'll build something new." The wedding that took place 6 months later was unlike anything the territory had ever seen. Apache and white settlers came together in celebration, sharing food, music, and traditions from both cultures. Judge Crawford performed the ceremony, incorporating both Apache customs and territorial law. As Ayanna and Dakota exchanged vows, she caught Jake's eye and saw tears of pride and joy on his weathered face. He had saved a lost Apache child years ago, never imagining that she would grow up to help save an entire community. The years that followed brought their own challenges, but also great joy. Ayanna and Dakota established a ranch that employed both Apache and white workers, becoming a model for cooperation throughout the territory. They raised children who spoke both English and Apache, who knew the stories of both peoples, and who carried forward the bridge their parents had built. Jake lived to see his grandchildren grow up, watching with pride as Ayanna's work brought lasting peace to the territory. When he passed away peacefully at the age of 78, both Apache and white communities mourned his loss, remembering him as a man who had shown that love and justice could overcome fear and prejudice. At his funeral, Ayanna spoke about the cowboy who had rescued a lost Apache girl and, in doing so, had rescued an entire community from a future of endless conflict. "Do you recall me, cowboy?" she whispered to his grave as the sun set over the desert. "I'm the Apache girl you rescued years back. And because of you, I was able to rescue others in return." As she walked away from the cemetery, hand in hand with Dakota, and surrounded by their children, Ayanna knew that Jake's legacy would live on in the peace they had built together, one that honored both the strength of the Apache people and the courage of a cowboy who had chosen love over fear when it mattered most. The Double M Ranch continued to thrive, now run by the next generation, who carried forward the values Jake and Ayanna had instilled. That family is chosen by the heart, that justice requires courage, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is to build bridges where others see only walls.